Hello, good morning. This is Dutch Thompson with Game Changers. I am a neuroathletic trainer and I work with MP3. That's my company, Move Past Pain to Performance. And we find that in my work, working with the brain, sometimes first we can see other body problems and ailments fade away. So people will come to me with elbow pain or knee pain or any variety of things, but when we start to look at the brain space that might be responsible for moving that joint, we can often see improvement. So it's a neuro approach rather than a biomechanical approach. And I've been really excited about launching this series of 10 game changer episodes. With me today is a man that basically doesn't need an introduction. This is Dr. James Doty. I'll read to you if you don't know already. If you haven't heard of this man, he is the author of Into the Magic Shop. You have to read his book. It is not an option. So this is a little bit about who's with me today. Dr. Doty is a clinical professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at Stanford University School of Medicine. He is also founder and director of CCARE, the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University, of which His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, is the founding benefactor. Dr. Doty's book, Into the Magic Shop, is the story of his amazing journey. The subtitle explains a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Please welcome me as I join Dr. Doty to the call right now. You are on screen now, Dr. Doty. We're in a side-by-side panel. I'm going to take me out for a second and put me back in so we're the way that the screen likes to see us. And here we go. So thank you for joining me, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me, Dutch. It's a pleasure to be with you today and be on Game Changers.
Fantastic. And you certainly are a game changer. How are you getting through the environment we have right now with COVID-19 and just the strange situations that we're facing?
Well, I think it is definitely a strange situation, but I have to be honest with you. I'm extraordinarily blessed. I have a home, I have a job, I have resources, I have a beautiful house. And for me, I am not suffering like so many other people are suffering with homelessness, with lack of financial resources or other resources, being confined to a small space. So I would be embarrassed if I complained whatsoever. I am extraordinarily blessed to be in my position. I feel very deeply, though, for so many who are suffering. You know, the challenge with so many of these things is when we think of, let's say, Buddhist philosophy, we think about attachment to outcomes. And in this particular instance, it's the other side of the coin, which is refusal to accept. And the refusal to accept reality, just like attachment, causes suffering. When you accept a situation as it is, and realize all your thought machinations are not going to change that, then you can start dealing with the reality of acceptance and moving forward versus expending so much energy in thinking about what could have been or might have been or should have been.
Right. And so many of us are and stuck in that, not just with COVID-19, but in life in general, right? We can't accept where we're at. We're constantly fighting it. So such important words. I think so many of your insights are so deep and can go such a long way for our audience right now. We're probably going to touch on 10 golden morsels as we spend some time together. Each one of these has the potential to change your life. So that one right there, put a check on that. Try not to be too attached to things, but accept the way they are. And that way you'll be able to move on and get past them. Dr. Doty, what is keeping you most busy these days? Is it CCARE? Is it your neurosurgical work? What's taking your time?
Well, honestly, until the last week or so, I've not been able to practice neurosurgery except for emergencies. And I'm only on call for 4 to 5 days a month. So during that period, I have been somewhat busy, but otherwise, we are not doing any elective surgery or seeing patients unless it's urgent or emergent. So now we're transitioning, I won't say back to normal or the new normal, perhaps. But a couple of things have been taking my time. One is I've been on a large number of podcasts related to mental health during COVID, which is a huge problem. You know, so many people prior to this are suffering from stress, anxiety, depression. And unfortunately, this has put even more strain on many, many people. Unfortunately, especially in the United States, somehow we have created an environment where if someone is suffering or haven't achieved, it's somehow their fault. And we have a system that over the last few decades has continued to change what was the middle class to poor people, while we see corporations actually become more and more profitable. And we see this ever increasing wealth inequality. I mean, imagine for the average family in the United States, they have only $400 to deal with a potential crisis.
Wow.
How is that even possible? And if you look at the COVID-19 situation, it's devastating. And so, how could we have created a society where we have essentially removed the safety net, which I believe in a society that is as wealthy as our own and the greatest in the world, at least nominally, we have somehow taken away, the ability to have health care, have a stable job. We have a minimum wage, not a living wage. We have all of these things that actually have now been, if you will, shown the naked truth of them in the face of this present situation. And it's horribly sad. I'm hoping that when we look at this and see where we're at ultimately, that instead of having a ruthlessness and a winner-take-all environment, we will have an environment that recognizes the other is us, and we have a responsibility. Those of us who have been successful in life in a variety of endeavors have a responsibility to care for the vulnerable, the weak, because at the end of the day, we are judged by how we care for those people.
Okay. So one of the things that I love about your work, Dr. Doty, is some people, when they start talking about love and compassions and flowers and rainbows, it's almost as if they lose grasp of the other reality, that we do live in a world that's awfully tough sometimes. And yet you are firmly rooted, from what I can tell, in both realities. We live in a super frustrating, challenging world, and yet you've been exposed to some extraordinary beauty. And if you could kind of go into that, I think there's some very particular ways that you're an open human being to seeing both of those realities. Can you speak to that some?
Sure. Well, I think what happens so often for many of us is that we focus on us. And that's not unnatural. It's just we have a tendency to see our world through how it affects only us. Yet surrounding us is a world, and it's a world populated by other beings, and it's a world that's populated by a lot of different, if you will, worldviews. And what happens is so often is that we get so caught up in our stuff and what we want and what we need that we don't see what I would say is the true nature of reality. Part of the problem, too, though, is that we have a tendency to also be self-critical. We have a tendency when we look at our situation that I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. And we were talking about earlier, if only this had happened. And as a result of that, we are truly never present because we're in our head all the time. And that stops us actually from truly authentically connecting. The other aspect is that to authentically connect, you have to be vulnerable. But many fear if they show their vulnerability that they're going to be judged in a negative way, that they couldn't hack it, that they were weak, that they shouldn't be here.
Yep.
And it's this fear that unfortunately drives the behavior of so many people. Yet the reality is that you're as good as you're going to be, in the sense that you deserve love, you deserve nurturing, you deserve being cared for. And all of us have the same insecurities. And it doesn't make us any less, and it doesn't make us not worthy of love. And when you're kind to yourself, and there's been a lot of science about this now, when you are self-compassionate, there's a whole body of scientific literature on this, it allows you to be more compassionate and less judgmental to other people. And what happens is that when you are able to remove this criticality, you're actually able to see the world not with judgmental eyes and anger and hostility about what could have been or might have been. You understand that everyone is suffering and everyone deserves love. And in fact, that's what makes a human being thrive. As I talked about in my book, and it was kind of you to mention that, just to mention it's now in, I think, almost 40 languages. And yeah, it's actually on Amazon still, and it's got, I think, over 1,000 reviews, and it's still a 5-star review. So it's really quite extraordinary. And it's
I was just agreeing it is.
but the interesting thing about it, well, there's certainly the memoir narrative of my story. I think that beneath this is a lot of wisdom that I have obtained both through pain and suffering, and also through my own searching. This is another thing that causes people to suffer. I talk about equanimity, this evenness of temperament. And what happens for so many people is when something good happens to you, or when you're acknowledged, you want to hold that feeling of, I'm great, people recognize me for being fantastic, I'm super. And the problem is that's not real, because it's transitory.
Right.
And you sit there and always want that craving, it's never going to be enough. And sadly, this is the nature of oftentimes people who are very wealthy. They have one thing and they want more and they want more, because it's like an addiction. You need more and more of the drug, and then it starts having less and less of an effect. So you need more. And the thing, though, is that when you have your down times, when you are in very, very difficult situations, what happens is that you learn who you are. You learn your degree of resilience. You learn some of the most incredible wisdom lessons from that. And oftentimes, with the distance of time, you realize and you're grateful and you're thankful that they happen, because it's taken you to another level in your life and another step towards self-actualization, I think. So, and the thing is, we can never run away from the bad times, and hopefully we'll continue to have good times. But the thing is to have an evenness of temperament throughout this, so that you see the wonderful times as transitory, but you also appreciate, while the tough times, they're painful, they're also transitory.
Speaking of your book, I don't want to go any further without thanking you for your impact on my son's life. I'm fortunate to have great kids. My son's always been a leader and a man with a kind heart. I'm very proud of him. I wish I had his wisdom at his age, even before he got exposed to your book. Um, but he read your book about 5 months ago, and something clicked. It just was a game changer for him. And so where he was a good leader with good focus before, there was this peace that just exploded in him. And he came to us and said, Mom, Dad, you've got to start meditating. He became the parent for us. Which was beautiful. I loved it because all of a sudden he had a depth of maturity I hadn't seen and didn't think I was ever going to see. But just this beautiful sudden maturity and a grace and a tenderness that an ability to communicate about stuff he was dealing with in a way that was so adult-like. And he's in college right now, and but it was so amazing, and I want to thank you for your impact on my son and on my family. We've all started a habit of daily meditating. Even my wife, who is even if I'm type A at all, she is on a completely different spectrum. She is a super high achiever, high A, wonderful lady, and so to see her own that, all right, I'm going to step back, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to be quiet. Wow, what an impact you've had on my family. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you. Well, I have to say, when I wrote this book, I had no expectation and no attachment to an outcome, if you will. An individual had come to a number of my lectures and had heard many of my stories, and it turned out he was a literary agent, and he convinced me by writing sort of my story, it would have an impact on people. And, my statement to him was, well, I'll do it. And, the reality is if it helps one person, that's enough. But I've been blessed by receiving comments like that from so many people. And, I think that what amazes me is when I wrote this book, obviously it's my story, and I did not appreciate two things. One is how so many other people are suffering, and you look at other people and they seem successful, they seem together, but in fact they're hurting deeply.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
So we before we moved to our present place. I'm in Denver now, but we lived in one of the most affluent cities in the country before this, and I was always I was taken aback by my doctor. He said the number of prescribed anti-anxiety and antidepressant drugs in our little city was among the highest in the nation. So yeah, all these people were fantastic at smiling on the outside and dying on the inside.
And that's it's so true. And again, it gets back to this fear of being judged or not accepted. The other thing is that I thought my story was a particular American story, but I found it amazing that it resonates so universally. I mean, Thailand, Japan, Poland, United Arab Emirates, South Korea. I mean, it's been amazing to me how what I thought, was a story of struggle in the U.S. is actually a universal struggle that so many people in the world have, and and the fact that what I describe my own journey and the lessons I learned. These have been written in a variety of different texts over thousands of years. My struggle, the struggles we all go through, are universal and they've been around since our existence. But I think many of us we can be exposed to all sorts of things, but then that one thing hits us that resonates with us in the way we need it to resonate. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I
I
think
think for many people, my book has ended up being that, and I'm grateful and thankful for that.
well, your journey was so interesting and rare. I mean, frankly, I came from a fairly dark history similar to yours, um, and so it took some work and some luck to get out of that situation. But here you are with nothing and really quite hopeless as a, I think, 13-year-old at the time. And suddenly you meet Ruth. And for 6 weeks, she takes you under her wing, and there's a transformation that happens. Then, and that's just so powerful. I mean, for one thing, for one human being to say, here's a kid I don't know, I haven't seen him before, they just walk into the store one day, and all of a sudden, that adult is going to give you 2 hours a day for the next 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That's an investment.
No, I mean, it's quite extraordinary, but I think it points out two things. I think it points out how each of us has the opportunity to change someone's life profoundly. And most of us never think we have that ability. And sometimes it's not 2 hours a day for 6 weeks, it's one interaction. And so we should never forget the impact for good and sometimes, unfortunately, for negative on another human being. Because in the right circumstance, just one interaction can so embed itself within a person that they remember it the rest of their lives. And it can be for good or bad. As an example, I remember I was giving a lecture about judgment and about this type of thing and how you can overcome that. And a woman stood up, and she was in her 50s, and she started crying. And she said, my father told me I would never be anything. And here she is in her 50s, still carrying that monkey on her back. Now, while it drove her to be, quote unquote, successful, that success was driven by pain. Versus, imagine the narrative if he had said, you were so special, you could do anything. And how that would have embedded itself and how it would have changed her whole interaction, because her interaction was driven by not being good enough, being fearful, being anxious, being judged, versus having this light within her that says, people believe in me. I can do anything.
Yeah.
And this is the empowerment of a positive narrative in an interaction with another person. And again, sometimes it can be simply a word.
So powerful. And I love, one of my favorite things about you, as I've seen you speak now several times, is your ability to go tender and go to the heart directly. That's a beautiful gift you have, sir, and I celebrate that so much. It's such a rare voice, and it's so rare to hear a leader speak with that kind of intentionality, integrity, and beauty from the heart. So, again, thank you for your work and making the heart something that is tender and beautiful, and something that we can all reach deeper into to pull love and inspiration and compassion out of. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you. It's interesting. I found that so many people are afraid of showing their emotions or showing a tear
Yeah.
or having their voice break because they think that it's a sign of weakness. And the reality is, it's actually a sign of incredible strength. When you're able to sit and show your emotions and not be afraid of that, it takes an immense amount of strength. And I don't say that to toot my own horn, but it's just so true. But you shouldn't be afraid, because there's nothing wrong with tenderness and with kindness and love. And it's interesting. I gave a talk one time, and where my voice cracked and I shed a tear. And a woman comes up to me afterwards, and she says, I felt so sorry for you. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, you must have been so ashamed that you were crying there and showing your emotion. And, all these people are watching.
Right.
And, And she said, I'm a psychiatrist and a hypnotist. And she said, if you spend 3 sessions with me, I can get rid of that.
No, please don't. That's terrible.
Yeah. But that's what's so sad here. Theoretically, someone who understands the mind is, because again, for me, if I can stand in front of an audience and be authentic and show my emotion, it liberates them to be free themselves.
Yeah.
And as soon as I shed a tear, everyone starts crying.
Yeah. It's almost like it lets the dam loose, right? We're all pent up with it up to
Yes. Yeah, because it allows them not to have to contain that emotion, but to really feel what it's like to have true depth of emotion and have it positively connect with them and the power of it. And it's wonderful, I think.
And on those lines, the story of you being before the committee to be accepted for medical school is so beautiful. You're in there in front of, I don't know, a panel of 7 or 8 people, and you unpack how dare you come to Jesus moment, right? So what a moment that was. Can you share a little bit more about that? What was that? I know they were crying, you said, at the end of that. So you must have been a little skilled in tenderness even at that time.
Well, my time with Ruth obviously profoundly and deeply impacted me and stayed with me. And as you point out, I was meeting with this committee who had to write a letter for me. It was from my college to the admissions committee for medical school. And initially, they refused to even talk with me because they said, quote unquote, it was a waste of their time. And I forced them to talk to me because my grade point average was actually quite low. And at that time, the average grade point average for entrance into med school was 3.79, and mine was 2.53. It was in no way competitive. But, I had to leave college. I had to work. I had to drop classes. I had a very difficult time in college. So in front of this committee, I walked into this room, and imagine what it's like as a 19-year-old. You walk into this committee, and there's a guy who's in charge in front. He has your file. He throws it on the desk, and he says, say what you have to say, and let's get this over with. And it's horrible. And what I said was, who gave you the right to destroy people's dreams? Also, the reality that there's no evidence whatsoever that a certain grade point average is a determinant of an ability to care, to have compassion, to be a physician. And I basically lectured them for about 30 or 45 minutes because I told them I refuse to let you judge me as a grade point average and not as a human being. And see, this is the key here. A fellow human being, unless they're a sociopath, cannot look away and not emotionally connect if you show them your humanity. And in fact, it's like me giving lectures. When my voice breaks, when I shed a tear, I connect with another's humanity, and they cannot not respond to that. And it was the same thing here. I forced them to look at me, not the grade point average, but me. Wow. Then once they were to look at me, they understood I was determined, I was resilient, and I wouldn't take no for an answer. And so at the end of this, they were all crying, and they gave me the highest letter of recommendation that was possible.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Yeah.
Let me tell you the rest of that story, which is not in the book, I don't think, because sometimes I forget what's in my book. But fast forward, and after Hurricane Katrina, the university was flooded. It was closed for 2 years. They moved the medical school to Houston at Baylor, and the dean resigned, and because he was depressed. They needed a new dean. They were trying to recruit one from Harvard, but he wanted an endowed chair, which is someone makes a donation to give a named chair. And so, long story short, imagine I ended up endowing that chair. So the dean of the medical school now is the Doty professor. I rebuilt the library, and I'm one of the largest, if not the largest, donors to the medical school of any graduate. And I'm on the dean's advisory board, as well as the president of universities.
Wow, that's amazing. So fun. We come around full circle. Beautiful. Um, so over the time that you've had at CCare now, you have been privileged to meet with some amazing people in the world. The Dalai Lama, one of your benefactors now, and another fascinating discussion you had with the Vietnam monk Thich Nhat Hanh. These are extraordinary people, and I want to ask you, as you've sat down with them, have you found compassion to be contagious?
Well, I think compassion is contagious in the right environment. And, in addition to the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, Amma, the hugging saint, Eckhart Tolle, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, and I've also been with the Pope and with Desmond Tutu. And I would say probably I've been blessed to spend time with probably the leading spiritual leaders that are alive, today. And people say, "What's that like?" And what I tell them is, it's never about the dogma. These people are above dogma. The fundamental connector for these evolved spiritual leaders is: do you love? Do you care? Do you have an open heart? Because people ask me, they go, "How is it even possible that you can develop close relationships with these people, yet you're not a believer?" And frankly, I'm an atheist. And because I tell them it's not about the dogma, it's about who you are. And, somebody, as you, I'm sure, well aware, there are some Christians who espouse their knowledge of the Bible, who are some of the most reprehensible people imaginable,
Sure.
And as well as in every other faith.
Mhm.
And they promote themselves as being, special, when in fact they're the antithesis of what their teachings are all about.
Right.
Uh, and so you don't need any dogma to love, to be kind, to be compassionate, to have an open heart. Nothing.
So on that note, let's dive into a little bit of the science, if you don't mind. So this is the part that I get very excited about. I'm a neuro geek. So vagus nerve, what some people refer to as the insular cortex. Could you speak some about the science of compassion and what actually changes in the brain chemistry when we're compassionate people?
Well, I think you have to understand just a little bit about the evolution of our species, and then it makes the neurologic response more clear. So, to have what we call theory of mind, to recognize that an other has independent thoughts from you, to have complex language and abstract thinking, our cortex had to enlarge. The price for that was that, unlike other species who run off into the forest or swim away as soon as they're born, our offspring have to be cared for a decade and a half or so. And they learn through the mechanism of mirroring our behavior. Thus, we have what are called mirror neurons. That mirroring means that they have the ability to intuit facial expressions, body habitus, intonation of voice, and even smell. The cost in terms of caring for our offspring is massive in terms of resources, energy, time. Why would somebody do that? The reason you do it is that when your offspring suffer, are in pain, are needy, you are motivated to care for them by the release of certain hormones or neurotransmitters in your brain. The most commonly known one is oxytocin, or the love or nurturing hormone. And what happens is when you care for your offspring, then you are rewarded by the release of oxytocin, which stimulates your pleasure centers. The other thing that happens is that when you care, there's a shift to engage that part of your vagus nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system. When you're in that mode, your physiology works at its best. As we evolved as a species to hunter-gatherer tribes, which you probably know, that was our primary survival strategy in groups of 10 to 50, really until just 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. When a member of your tribe was suffering in pain, they put the whole tribe at risk. So your ability to know their emotional state and to intervene was highly critical for your survival. So the other aspect to know is that when we evolved on the savannah in Africa, and let's say we saw a blade of grass move, we had learned that that could represent a lion. And as a result, that would engage the other part of our vagus nerve, the sympathetic nervous system, the flight, fight, or freeze response. And that would engage that part of your nervous system and result in the release again of other neurotransmitters and hormones. And that would allow your pupils to dilate, your blood pressure to increase, you to divert blood from your intestines to your skeletal muscle and allow you to run away and hopefully survive. And those two components actually are what determine how we function in the world. The problem is that in the modern world, we never have evolved to live in that world. Evolution moves glacially slow, very, very slow, yet technology has dramatically increased exponentially. And as a result, many people are stressed and anxious all the time. So what happens is that when you are stressed and anxious, it stimulates your sympathetic nervous system. It goes and your amygdala is engaged. And as a result, certain things happen in your peripheral physiology. Your heart rate increases, as I discussed. Actually, your immune system is depressed. You actually have the release of inflammatory proteins and the release of cortisol, which on a long-term level has very negative health effects. And many people have these chronic release of these stress hormones because they're chronically stressed. Through different practices and techniques, though, you can actually shift to be in this state of calmness, openness, because when you're stressed and anxious, you're in survival mode and you are not thinking clearly. When you're relaxed, engaged, open, your executive control function areas work at their best. You have access to memory, you have access to experience, you have access to thoughtful discernment. And this allows you to make much better decisions. And when you're in this state, again, your immune system is boosted, your cardiac function is improved. What we call heart rate variability decreases, which is or actually increases in this state, and which is associated with cardiac health. So you have these immense positive health benefits when you have the right mental state. To get to the right mental state, you are compassionate to yourself, you're less critical, you are self-affirming, you look at the world as not as against you, but something that allows you to thrive and flourish. Because, when we talk about happiness, many people look externally to say, if I just had this, if I just had that, if this one thing would happen. Yet, as you know as well as I, happiness comes from only internally. That's it. You can have everything and be miserable on the inside. You can have nothing and be gloriously content.
Right. So many beautiful things in there. All right, so now into the state of living hacked. So we used to be in the savannah, lion attack, we shift into the sympathetic nervous mode and we're ready to fight or freeze. Hopefully it's climb up the tree as fast as we can. But today we're hacked, and I love your figure of speech. You say we all kind of live in this brain hacked state of being chronically stressed, and we need to hack back. I just really love that. What are some ways we can recognize when we're hacked the wrong direction, and maybe what are a couple ways that you can recognize that and hack back?
Sure. Well, obviously, I think most people know when they're stressed and anxious. Obviously, their heart rate increases, and actually, they have a sense of being scared about what's going to happen next. And of course, this is a state where no one wants to live. I think one of the most important things is an understanding that there are very few things that warrant that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there was a great book. I love the title. I didn't get all the way through the book, but years ago it was Don't Sweat the Small Stuff.
Exactly. And I think that's exactly right. So many of us get wound up in what we think is important at that moment. And when you reflect back on it, it meant nothing. And what I have learned, and this is from a book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, it's the stimulus and then the response. Something stimulates us and we respond. Typically, a sudden stimulus results in engagement of our sympathetic nervous system, or this flight or fight response. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, this unleashes this chain of all sorts of things. And it's automatic almost. It's deeply embedded within us. But if you can learn to have a pause, and I usually try, at least it's not so much conscious anymore, but several seconds before I engage, that is where your freedom lies.
Beautiful.
And yes, so you can choose, am I going to be reactive and aggressive, if you will, or run away, or am I going to stop for a moment and process and try to understand what this really is? And when you understand what it really is, because most of the time when somebody comes on to you aggressively, oftentimes it has nothing to do with you.
Right.
It could have been they had an argument with their wife. They had some sour milk. Whatever it is, many times their reaction has nothing to do with you. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a very quick example. I was working with a physician colleague, much younger than me, on a project. He had decided to quit his job, and he had a young family, and he was going off to do this other thing, but the job didn't start for a few months. And we were working on this project. He came in to see me, and he came on to me extraordinarily aggressively about something that really wasn't that important. But my initial response was to say, screw you, you're wrong, et cetera, but I didn't. Yeah. What I looked at him and I said to him, this is not like you. What is going on?
Wow.
Looks at me, bursts into tears. Tells me that what had happened was, because he was transitioning jobs, his young, healthy family didn't want to spend the money on the COBRA insurance, the gap in health insurance, so he didn't get it. Wife went to the doctor because of a lump in her breast, just found out it was malignant.
Wow. Wow.
So you see,
Hmm.
the driver there.
Yes.
So now, long story short, he was able to get the Cobra, fortunately,
Wow.
retroactively,
Hmm.
and it turned out his wife ended up being fine, and it was all good.
Wow.
But you see, I could have reacted to him
Yeah. Yeah.
in a
No way
certain
everybody else in the world would. Right?
yes,
You jerk.
yeah, exactly. And the other example is let me give you another one. I'm sure you have been driving along and you have been cut off by somebody. And typically, when that happens, your first response is one of two. It's either use a four-letter word oftentimes or use a hand gesture, right? But, and this is also about reframing. What if I told you, though, that wasn't some jerk who was trying to cut you off? That was a man who was driving his wife to the hospital. She was 9 months pregnant, broke her water, and she was bleeding. Of course, now you sit there and say, God, I'll drive them to let me lead them. You see, you're not angry at them anymore.
Right. Right.
In fact, you're wishing them well.
Yeah.
You see, and it's a completely different change in how you see the world.
Yeah.
And this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
You need to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And because all of these actions you have, they're only hurting you. You know, it's like anger.
Yeah.
When you have anger, it's like drinking poison and somehow thinking it's going to have an effect on the other.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody cuts you off, I don't like my son will say to me, we'll be driving and somebody will do that. And I'll sit there and not respond at all. I'll say, I wish them the best wherever they're going, and I hope they don't hurt themselves.
Right.
Because them cutting me off, and hopefully I don't get hurt or anything, but I get there 3 seconds later to where I'm going.
Right. Right.
And it's changing how you look at all of these interactions.
And making you healthier, because every time you get ticked at anyone, it turns on the wrong nervous system.
Absolutely. And so, learning these types of practices, and, you've asked me about some of them. I think certainly a mindfulness or meditation practice that incorporates self-compassion and compassion for others. And we've developed a program at CCARE called Compassion Cultivation Training. That's very helpful. And we've done a number of studies on that.
Is that something anybody can take or sign up for? Or?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's out now online with one of our collaborators called the Compassion Institute. But really, the key is ultimately at the end of the day, compassion for self, compassion for others.
Beautiful. All right, so we're moving toward the end of our interview. I would like to ask what you might want to ask of our audience. What work are you doing next? How can we follow you? Do you want us to pay attention to anything in particular?
A real quick few things. Certainly, anyone can go to our website, which is ccare.stanford.edu, and see some of the things we're doing. I think people often say, what is your personal practice? And if you recall at the end of my book, I talked about something called the alphabet of the heart. And so I gave a lecture to these incoming medical students and wanted to give them something that would allow them to center themselves, not only as physicians, but as human beings. And it was 10 letters of the alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
And those 10 letters are compassion for self and others, recognizing the dignity of every human being, practicing equanimity, which we talked about, practicing forgiveness, which relates to anger, of course, having gratitude. So many people have a tendency to look up at what they don't have, but not be thankful for what they do have. And this is particularly a problem with people who are very affluent. When you think about half of the world living on $2.50 a day, anyone listening to this podcast is probably blessed.
Right. Yeah, no doubt.
And humility, I try to walk the world thinking I'm no more important than anyone else. And this can be to the guy who's sweeping the floors. Like I can always tell a good doctor. When you walk through the hospital, a good doctor greets everyone. The guy sweeping the floor, the person changing the bedpans, the nurses, they know his name. They smile at him, because I cannot live in this world and do the job that I do without the help of so many people.
Beautiful.
And so I think about that frequently. I is having integrity and values that you bound your behavior by. J is justice, this concept of fairness, or our responsibility for those who are privileged to care for the vulnerable. K is kindness, just simply doing an act for another. They don't have to be suffering, all contained by love. So what I do every morning, I wake up, I breathe for a few minutes. I think of awe and wonderment and joy. And then I go through that alphabet of the heart, and that centers me to how I function every day.
So people could go through all of those. For many of us, I might recommend going through one word a day or one word a week. Another thing, I don't know if you're familiar with the angel cards, but it has all of those words plus several more that you can just draw out of a dish. But my wife Karen and my son Scott are using some of the angel cards as well as your alphabet of the heart. So thank you again for awesome wisdom and insight. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you today, sir. Thank you so much for coming on my program, for being the game changer that you are, for changing lives every day, for being a leader of compassion and tenderness. I don't really have anything else to go through with you. I know you've got important things to do or that you need to get to. Thank you so much. You were so generous with your time. And thank you so much.
Take you. You'll be well.
You too. Have a great day.
Thanks.